For today's Critical Thought, we're going to be discussing enemy design, and more specifically, how Resident Evil 2 has perhaps one of the best collection of enemies I've seen in a video game. And I guess I'm the Alice in this wacky bunch tonight. Enemy design is one of those multifaceted topics, and it's one that can cover a very wide assortment of games. And we're not going to get to everything in this video, but I want to talk more specifically about Resident Evil 2. Besides doing the dissecting design on it, there's a part of this design that I want to focus especially on, and that's what this video is for. And that is the role of the enemies. Now, good enemy design definitely varies from genre to genre. How you design an enemy in a game like Ninja Gaiden would be different than designing an enemy in Final Fantasy or Darkest Dungeon, and you get the picture. But when it comes to good enemy designs, one of the things that we've seen a lot of developers kind of move away from, especially when we talk about games from the 80s and 90s to today, is quantity. In the old days, you couldn't throw a stone in a game without running into some manner of rat, troll, ogre, green rat, blue ogre, yellow troll, orange rat, and you get the picture. And the idea was just to keep throwing enemies at the player and just scaling things up again higher and higher and so on and so on. And while this certainly gives the player a lot of things to fight, it kind of dilutes the quality of those encounters. A green rat is stronger than a red rat, but is weaker than a blue rat, and a black rat is higher in quality than a gold rat, and again, what am I even fighting here? And this is especially true when it comes to horror design. And enemy design in a horror game is different than anything else. It's what I'm thinking about with my third book that I have planned right now. When we're talking about a horror experience, there is a fine line in terms of just how many enemies or enemy types you want to assault the player with. If you put too many enemies in, then it just evolves into an action game. Again, Doom, despite being on Hell or on Mars and fighting demons from Hell, is not a horror game. You're going to be fighting so many zombies, imps, cacodemons, cyber demons, and any other demon variety you can think of for 8 to 10 hours, and you're just going to probably be able to fill like a giant stadium with their corpses. But when we look at the best examples of horror, you also have to consider the type or the challenge of these enemies. You can have very few enemies, but if they all behave the same way, then what's the point? One of the issues I ran into with games like Outlast and Amnesia, again, is that no matter how you try to make this place scary and dark and freak the player out, if the same solution or situation applies to every enemy, where's the horror? If one guy will kill me if he walks up to me, and the same goes for this guy, I'm just doing the same thing for however long the game is going to be. And another big point is that the longer you have a horror experience, the harder it becomes for these enemies to keep generating terror. When you first start playing a game like Silent Hill or Resident Evil or Dead Space, these enemies are frightening when you have no idea what you're doing and you have very little in terms of weapons. In Dead Space, on the other hand, by the halfway to 3/4 section, you are able to just decimate these guys. When we played Dead Space 2 on stream, we got that lovely lightning javelin that, sticks into the enemy and then just does AoE around it, killing everything it comes in contact with. At that point, it doesn't matter how dark or frightening the area is, when you're just pretty much doing witty one-liners or trying to do them, like Ash in Evil Dead. So, with those two extremes, in terms of having too many enemies or not having enough challenges, let's get to a lot of game footage, as we're going to try and break down each of the major enemies in Resident Evil 2 and how they each did their own unique role and how that made the game better for it. But as always, a quick shout out to our Patreon backers. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon backers: And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, you'll find our Discord channel linked down below. Alright, we got a lot of footage to go through here, so we're going to try and do things as quickly as possible. The first enemy in Resident Evil 2 is obviously the zombie. And as I said this on our Discord, as well as on some of our chats, the zombies in Resident Evil 2 I think may be one of my favorite horror enemies I've seen in any game, or in any horror genre title. And the reason has to do with just how unpredictable they are from a design standpoint. A major part of this has to do with the fact that these enemies move and kind of go about in a dynamic fashion. They don't always appear in the same part of a room. Their movement or their actual process or gait towards you is emergent or dynamic based on the damage you do to them. If you start shooting a zombie in the head, they may actually start kind of forcing their body to keep going forward, increasing their speed. Otherwise, they may get staggered or get knocked down. Zombies will also walk in and out of rooms if they know that you're in a room that's next to them, but only if they're able to get access to it. At this part in the game, this guy will not come through that door. At least I hope he doesn't. But the zombies themselves take a lot of damage to kill unless you have specific weapons meant for it, i.e. the shotgun. You need a defensive item here, as you see. And part of the challenge of dealing with these enemies, and that was a really good shuffle by him, I must say, is that they're so unpredictable as horror enemies. Most of the time when you play a survival horror game, the enemies are just, or even just the basic ones, are fodder. Once you fought one, you can fight 10, or 20, or 50. In this game, the zombies are so durable, and how they move around is so unpredictable, as you saw right there, that it turns every encounter with them into its own dynamic or unique situation. Now, that guy that I just shot down, he may not even be dead, because on hardcore mode they have so much more health compared to the other difficulties. So you have to use either a shotgun or just put more handgun ammo into them. And this again makes things so much more interesting by the fact that I can't predict what these zombies are going to do. And while you can stun them or knock them down, another major part of how dynamic they are is that they have full, like almost ragdoll or skeletal system. If I shoot the guy in the leg enough, which I didn't do in this play, I will stagger them. If I shoot their arm off, it will make it easier for me to get around them. It's a very crazy idea in terms of making these enemies a lot more interesting than just stand still, shoot with 15 handgun bullets, they're dead, move on to the next. Speaking of moving on to the next, that's what we're going to do now. The Lickers occupy kind of the shock trooper role in Resident Evil 2. There aren't a lot of them in the game, but when you run into them, they are very difficult to deal with. They have a lot of health, they do tremendous amounts of damage, and if you're not careful on hardcore, they can easily kill you. But they are also one of the easiest enemies to get around once you know what you're doing. They're blind, and as long as you don't touch them and walk, you can just kind of safely tiptoe around them. But their role is to kind of force the player to slow down. And in most cases, they are more dangerous paired with another enemy than they are when they're just individually there. Because you can't safely deal with another enemy in the same room as a Licker without triggering that encounter. But they're probably the simplest of the enemies to talk about, and there's only just so few of them in a single play. Alright, so the next enemy is the Cerberus, and they basically take the role of the super fast, hard to hit enemies. They're the most maneuverable out of all the enemies in Resident Evil 2. They can also move in and out of rooms, over fences, things like that. They don't do as much damage as zombies or the Licker, but they're meant to overwhelm the player, and also be very hard to hit. The weird thing about playing or fighting against them is that you can kind of tank a lot of their damage, and just shoot them anywhere and they will go down. Now with this footage, it was me just kind of playing a dodge, or play a keep away with these doggies here. But what's very interesting from a design standpoint is that they only show up really in one section for each character. Leon faces them here in the garage. Claire fights them when she goes outside to go to the orphanage. And that's it. Like, it's kind of weird that we don't see more of these services compared to the other enemies, because even Lickers show up later. And they really do occupy more of a role as kind of a single encounter or single environmental type enemy, as our next example is going to demonstrate. The next enemy is probably more situational than the Cerberus, and those are the G-Adults. They only show up in the sewer system, and they can be very nasty for casual players of Resident Evil 2. You're going to see him about to show up in the next 3 seconds. What makes them so dangerous is that they really embody a lot of the challenging aspect of playing Resident Evil 2. They can easily attack you with a very wide range. You're not really fast enough to dodge them normally. And you're kind of in a position where you're going to be at a disadvantage when you encounter them. Usually they're going to be encountered in a narrow or a somewhat narrow hallway, or in this disgusting sewer here. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of dance around and trigger him, and there he goes. And I don't think I've actually ever killed one of these guys. I've just done my best to get around them. But they are very dangerous to fight, as they can cause poison. And if you do not have a blue herb, it can easily ruin your play. They only have a fixed number of attacks, but it's entirely random what attacks they'll use and when. Now that was a very unlucky grab there. But here I go, using my defensive items for dear life. But the important thing about dealing with the G-Adults is that, for one thing, you gotta be really careful. I think I got really screwed here, getting stuck up against this item and then kind of getting turned around. Yeah, I think I kind of went I went the right way there. But when you're dealing with the G-Adults, they can either grab you, they can do like a side swipe or vertical swipe, and sometimes they can do a spit where they'll summon more of these old G-babies to come and get you. Now, this is my first actual encounter with them, and I kind of got into a lot of trouble. Since this footage and doing a lot of the advanced play, I've gotten much better at getting around the G-Adults. But all these special items I am wasting really would have helped me when we get to the next enemy type. As I was recording this footage, I came to an interesting realization in how Resident Evil 2 definitely focuses more on conditional or situational enemies as opposed to just throwing a lot of them at the player. The only enemy that's kind of like your generic can appear anywhere situation would be the zombies. And they're designed again to be like your regular and more dynamic encounter. But what we have here is footage of the Ivy zombies. They are one of the final enemies you run into the game, and they are designed explicitly to punish a player if they don't use offensive weapons. How they work is you can either knock them down by shooting their little pustules on them or hitting them with a lot of damage. But the only way to kill them is by lighting them on fire, either with flame rounds or the flamethrower. And if they catch you and you don't have a sub-weapon, you are dead instantly. There's no way to get around it. And that's a very interesting design for this kind of game, because the Ivy zombies only show up in a few individual parts. And what's very fascinating is that you do not run into any other enemies in the same areas as they are. Normally in Resident Evil 2, they will throw in different enemies to kind of mess with you. Lickers and zombies, zombies and the Cerberuses, and again, try to overwhelm you like that. As we said earlier with the Licker example, Lickers are more dangerous when paired with any other enemy than they are just individually there. But the Ivy zombies never show up in an area where there's multiple enemy types. And I think developers did that as a balancing reason. Because when you're trying to fight the other enemies, having someone that can sneak up and kill you without any other means to avoid it can be kind of unfair. They do show up when you play the bonus action campaigns, the Ghost Survivors, Hunk, Tofu, things like that. But traditionally or normally, you just have to deal with them in these few areas. And if you don't have the resources to kill them, then you have to only use your resources to knock them down and then get around them. But I'm curious what people thought of the Ivy zombies from a design standpoint. To begin to wrap things up for this video, though, and I know we're not talking about Mr. X, and the reason is that we did a video separately on Mr. X about alpha antagonist design, and I talked about him in the Dissecting Design, which should be going up around the time of this piece. But Resident Evil 2 does a really good job of, no pun intended, fleshing out its enemy designs. This is not a long game. Each playthrough, once you know what you're doing, can take about 3 to 4 hours, less as you become more skilled at it. So this is not designed around a 20 to 30 hour campaign. And for the length of the game, all the enemies do remain as credible threats. The dynamic nature of the zombies force you to be very cautious around them. The Lickers, again, are dangerous when they're paired up with another enemy. Cerberuses are very agile. Ivies can get you like this. And of course, not to mention that the G-Adults in the sewers are commonly a run killer if you get unlucky dealing with them. But this is a great way of having this kind of horror atmosphere. Because again, if this game was 20 to 30 hours long, you would be fighting nothing but these guys, and things would become stale. But by keeping the experience short, it does allow them to really, I guess, escalate the threat level in this way. But the mechanical nature of the game does still hurt things. Once you know what you're doing with these encounters and where they show up, it's easy to make preparations and mitigate a lot of that difficulty. But to end things here, I'm curious, what do you think about the overall design of Resident Evil 2? And can you think of games that did a really good job of making their enemies unique and interesting? Not again about throwing 60, 70, 80 enemy types, but keeping a small pool, but making each one feel like a different and credible threat. Let me know in the comments below, but thanks again for watching, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.